I still remember the light reflecting off that crystal ceiling lamp, glittering across the cold marble floor, when the office door swung open and my world shattered into pieces. My name is Audrey Hayes. I was 36 that year, just promoted to creative director at a luxury fashion house in Manhattan. I had a penthouse overlooking Central Park, a Maine Coon cat named Leo, and an $80,000 engagement ring from the man I once believed I'd spend my life with, Caleb Morgan. Caleb was the kind of man my mother always dreamed I'd date. Handsome, accomplished, and impeccably polite. He'd built his own medical software company and became a millionaire before turning 40. We met at a charity art exhibit in Brooklyn, where he spent $20,000 on an oil painting I couldn't stop staring at. "I know nothing about art," he said with a crooked smile, "but if it made you smile like that, it's worth it." I loved him fully without question. And of course I wanted my family to love him too. I invited my younger sister, Camille, to dinner with us shortly after we got engaged. She's just 2 years younger, working as a public relations specialist in Philadelphia. We grew up in the same house in Vermont, shared bunk beds, itchy wool sweaters, and a dozen little secrets from grade school. But as we got older, invisible cracks formed between us. Glances from Mom that lingered longer on her, offhand comments that made me feel like I always had something to prove. Camille always had a certain sparkle. She knew how to make people feel seen. Caleb, naturally, laughed at her slightly over-the-top jokes during dinner that night. "Your sister's hilarious," Caleb said while we were doing the dishes. I just smiled. I was used to Camille becoming the center of every room. When it came time to choose a maid of honor, I chose Camille. My mother said, "It'll bring you two closer." I wanted to believe her. I truly believed that, at our age, childhood jealousy was a thing of the past. Our engagement party was held at a historic estate in New Jersey. Camille wore a pale blue silk dress, her hair in an elegant updo. She looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. I caught her looking at Caleb several times throughout the evening, quickly, subtly, but enough to make my stomach twist. "I recognize that look," my mom murmured as we stood in the kitchen arranging desserts. "Be careful, honey. Your sister doesn't always respect boundaries when she wants something." I laughed it off. "Mom, Camille's dating that guy in the wine business. They're moving to Napa Valley soon." Mom just looked at me. That kind of look that doesn't need words. 3 months later, Caleb started to change. Late night meetings, texts at 2 a.m., the same tired excuses. "What's on your mind?" he asked during dinner at my favorite Italian restaurant. Kept my tone light. "I'm starting to wonder where you really are when you're not with me." A week after that, while cleaning the living room for a small gathering, I found a silver bracelet with an amethyst charm wedged in the couch cushions. It was the Christmas gift I gave Camille the year before. I handed it to Caleb and he just shrugged. Oh, I must have given Camille a ride to the florist in Queens. Her car broke down. That night I called Camille. Her explanation matched his word for word. "Yeah, I lost it. So glad you found it." He was nice enough to give me a ride all the way there. I couldn't sleep that night. The following week, I decided to show up at Caleb's office with lunch from his favorite bakery. I needed to believe I was just being paranoid. His assistant looked flustered when she saw me. "Mr. Caleb is in a meeting. Would you like to wait?" I didn't answer. I walked past her and opened the door. That was the moment everything collapsed. Caleb, the man I planned to marry, was standing with Camille pressed against his desk. His arms were around her waist. Their lips were locked, unapologetically. They didn't hear the door close. I stood there frozen. I watched those familiar hands tangled in Camille's hair. I saw my sister's eyes, soft, unashamed. Camille spoke first. "You're early." Her voice was calm, like I was a guest who arrived before the party started. "How long?" I asked. Caleb adjusted his collar. "It's not what it looks like, Audrey." I looked straight at Camille. "How long?" "Since the engagement party," she replied. I set the lunch bag down on the desk. "So while I was picking out a wedding dress, you were picking the perfect time to betray me." I walked out without turning back. I don't remember how I got home. Only that my mother sat beside me all night, and my father paced the hallway, muttering curses I had never heard from his mouth before. From that day forward, I was no longer the Audrey I used to be. And Camille, she wasn't my sister anymore. It was the beginning of an ending. but also the start of a journey I never imagined I'd have to take. My mother was nearly speechless when I told her everything. She sat in the armchair in the living room, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her silver hair, pinned neatly behind her head, drooped slightly as she lowered her gaze. My father didn't stay calm the way she did. "That bastard," he roared, face flushing red as his grip tightened on the edge of the wooden chair. "That girl. Camille. Is she still my daughter?" I didn't have an answer for my dad. I just sat there, shoulders hunched, holding a bottle of water that had gone completely warm in my hand. Inside me was a bottomless void. That night, my dad had a mild heart attack. They got him to the ER in time, but the doctor said he needed to reduce stress, change his medication, and monitor his blood pressure regularly. I sat next to his hospital bed, watching the man I once thought was unshakable struggle for breath, for lines in his arms, eyes shut tight. My mom tried to stay calm, but I saw the redness around her eyes when she stepped out to call our family doctor. Camille didn't come to the hospital. My mom refused to speak to her. I didn't forbid it, but I didn't mention her either. Just hearing Camille's name made the air feel heavy, like ashes settling after an explosion. 3 days later we came home. The air in the kitchen was thick like winter fog in New Hampshire. Mom served dinner. Dad pretended to read the paper, his eyes never lingering on a single word for more than 2 seconds. I floated through the house like a ghost in my own life. Camille called. Mom let it ring. Dad turned off the ringer. She left a message. "I want to come to dinner. Talk to everyone." Mom looked at me. "Do you want that?" I nodded. I didn't know why. Maybe I needed to face it. Maybe I needed to hit rock bottom all the way. Camille showed up with perfectly done makeup, a fitted cream-colored dress, and heels clicking across the wood floor. She brought a bottle of red wine and smiled like all that happened was just some little family spat. Dinner was lasagna, Grandma's old recipe. No one said much. Camille talked a bit about work, about Caleb, about their new apartment. I stared at the engagement ring still on her finger. "You shouldn't wear that in front of me," I said, my voice low and quiet like an underground stream. Camille froze, looked down at her hand. "I'm sorry," she said, "but I really do love him." My dad slammed his spoon on the table. Mom gently placed her hand on his, like trying to keep the boiling point from spilling over. "We don't care who you love," he said, not looking at her. "We just want you to know what you destroyed." Camille didn't touch another bite. She got up, left her plate unfinished, and walked out of the house without saying goodbye. I thought I'd feel relief after that. I didn't. The emptiness just spread wider like oil on water. I returned to Manhattan a week later. My apartment overlooking Central Park suddenly felt unfamiliar, like somewhere I'd never really lived. The double photo frames, movie stubs tucked into books, little sticky notes on the fridge, they all looked like evidence of a dream that had died. I couldn't sleep. At night, I'd lie there listening to the soft hum of the air conditioner, like whispers through the walls. I took sleeping pills. They didn't help. I'd get up around 3 a.m., wander into the kitchen holding a glass of water I didn't remember pouring. At work, I couldn't focus. My design layout got sent back 3 times for color issues. My department head called me in for a meeting. "Audrey, if you need time off, just say so. We're worried about you." I tried to force a smile, but my throat closed up. I didn't want pity. I wanted a way out. That night, I made an appointment with a therapist. Her name was Marlene. She was in her 50s, spoke slowly like narrating a bedtime story. I curled up on the armchair, clutching a pillow, and talked, little fragments of memory that barely had anything to do with Caleb or Camille. Marlene didn't push. She asked just the right questions I hadn't seen coming. "When was the last time you felt you had value? When you were most confident, what were you doing? Have you ever considered that forgiveness is for your freedom, not theirs?" I didn't answer right away. But I felt lighter when I walked out of her office. Every morning I still went to work. But I didn't look in the mirror. I didn't recognize who I was anymore. I dressed on autopilot, tied my hair up, and slipped into the city like a shadow moving through crowds. One gray, rainy afternoon, I got a text from Caleb. Just 2 words, "I'm sorry." I deleted it instantly. Didn't even bother wondering what he wanted. The deepest wound wasn't losing him. It was losing myself. I picked up a pen. My first sentence read, "I gave away too much of myself to people who never knew how to hold it." I stopped, read it again, then closed the notebook. I didn't know where I was going next. But I was starting to understand. If I wanted to survive, I had to rebuild. Not as who I used to be, but as someone who could stand after being broken. I submitted my resignation on a cold, rainy Monday morning in Manhattan. No warning. No long email. Just a subject line: I need to leave. I packed up in silence. The desk I used to feel proud of was just a few cardboard boxes now. Some framed photos, a couple of books, a wilted cactus I'd forgotten to water. No one stopped me. That was its own kind of freedom and its own kind of ache. At home, I opened a map of the US on my laptop. My eyes lingered on Denver, then Charlotte, then finally Portland. But the name Minneapolis flickered in my mind like a quiet whisper. I'd never been there. No connections. No memories. No ghosts. I didn't need a reason. I just needed space to breathe. I rented a small third-floor walk-up in a quiet southwest neighborhood of the city. The old wood floors creaked, and the windows opened to red maple trees dancing in the autumn breeze. The landlady was a widowed woman named Mrs. Doyle, who left chamomile tea packets by my door every Friday. I left everything behind at 36 too, she said one afternoon as we stood in the sunlit hallway. No one teaches us how to begin again. Maybe that's why we remember it better when we teach ourselves. I smiled without asking questions. Some pain doesn't need explanation. Just a warm sentence to hold it. Job hunting wasn't easy. I sent out nearly 30 applications in the first 2 weeks, only to get a few automated responses and one phone call, from a small advertising design firm called Peakwave. The interviewer was Madison Clark, the associate creative director. Somewhere in her early 40s, short blonde hair with that gravelly voice of someone who used to smoke but quit years ago. Your resume is interesting, Madison said, placing the stack of papers on the glass table. I see you used to work at Bloomhart. I did. Why'd you leave? I paused, then answered directly. I stopped recognizing who I was there. She leaned back and laughed. I like that answer. We need someone tough enough to handle crazy clients. Not someone just chasing a paycheck. 3 days later, I got an email with the subject line, "Welcome to Peakwave." On my first day at the new office, I pulled out an old blazer I hadn't worn in months. Nobody asked too much about the past. Everyone here was busy. No one had time to judge. Madison gave me the grand tour and stopped by my desk, next to the window close to the coffee machine. "If you need anything, ask me," she said. "Just don't touch my brownies in the fridge." I laughed. The work wasn't easy, but it swept me along like a current pulling me out of a swamp. Strategy sessions, mock-up revisions, client meetings. It all wore me out, but for the first time in a long while I felt useful. Madison stayed late most nights. So did I. One quiet Thursday evening, when the office was filled with only the sound of typing and the hum of the AC, she slid me a cup of red wine in a paper cup. "Feels like my old bar back in Brooklyn," she smiled, raising her glass. "To the ones bold enough to start over." I clinked her cup. "And to those kind enough to give someone a second chance." We talked until nearly midnight. I shared fragments about the broken engagement, left out Caleb and Camille's names. Madison didn't pry. She just nodded occasionally and said, "Yeah, I get it," then gently steered the topic elsewhere as if letting me choose when to open up. In the weeks that followed, Madison invited me to join her Saturday morning running group. I showed up, even though I was wheezing like an ox by the end of the first mile. She introduced me to her wife, Rachel, an anesthesiologist with a warm smile and a freakishly good memory. After a few coffee outings with their circle, I started adding new names to my contact list. None from my past in New York. One October evening, I pulled out the black dress I once planned to wear at my wedding and took it to a second-hand shop near Lake Harriet. I placed it on the counter. "Are you sure?" the shop owner asked, smoothing the silk fabric. "I'm sure," I said and walked away. My steps felt lighter than they had in months. On the way home, I stopped by the park and sat on a bench watching crimson leaves fall. My phone buzzed, a message from Madison, "Storytelling workshop tomorrow morning. You in?" I typed back, "Absolutely. Thanks for not letting me sink." She replied with just 3 words, "We rise together." I looked up at the city lights spilling into the night sky, my chest lighter than the last breath of fall. Minneapolis was still cold but no longer lonely. Something inside me, small but steady, was flickering back to life. Not because I'd forgotten what Camille and Caleb had done, but because I felt chosen. Not by anyone else, but by me. On Friday afternoon, Madison tapped on my office window holding a latte. "Ride with me to the tech conference in St. Paul this Sunday," she said before I could object. "They need someone from creative. Or something black. Don't ask, just come." I sighed and closed my laptop. Should I prepare anything? Just smile. And don't let the tech bros think they're the smartest in the room. The conference was held at a sleek hotel overlooking the Mississippi River, with golden light cascading across oak panels and mirrored glass. I stepped into the main hall, where soft laughter mingled with the scent of espresso and expensive perfume. Madison quickly disappeared into the crowd, leaving me near the product mock-up display table. I held a glass of wine, watching the flow of people like a foreign film with no subtitles. Peak wave, right? A low male voice, steady, not showy. I turned around. The speaker wore a charcoal suit with no tie, his dark brown hair slightly tousled, but his gaze unusually focused. "Yes, I'm on the branding side. I'm Zachary Morton. From Haven Tech." The name sounded familiar. I'd probably read it in a finance article somewhere. "You're the investor behind Resync?" You could say that. I don't usually show up at events like this, but my dev team insisted. They think I should meet more actual humans. I chuckled. "I'm here because my boss needed someone who can time their smiles." He smiled, then gestured toward an empty seat nearby. "If you're not being whisked away, I could use the company. I only know 3 people in this room, counting you." I sat down. We talked about things totally unrelated to tech. How vegan food in Minneapolis was overtaking bigger cities, how a cafe near Lake Calhoun banned laptops, even how to tell if someone really reads books or just buys them for Instagram photos. Zachary didn't try to impress. He didn't interrupt, didn't fake concern, didn't check his phone more than once. As the evening wound down, he said, "I won't ask for your number if you're not comfortable. But would it be all right to send an email?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Sure. Just, no memes." I swear, no memes. 2 days later, my inbox had an email titled, "Not a meme, just a thank you." One sentence inside, "I never thought networking could feel that easy." Under his signature, he'd included a link to one of my company blog posts, where I'd analyzed emotional impact in pharmaceutical ads. I smiled and hit reply, "Thanks for reading. If you actually understood the part about serotonin, I owe you a coffee." We started with simple coffee meetups once a week at quiet spots. Sometimes a scruffy old bagel shop with wobbly tables. Sometimes a tiny cafe with only 6 seats, where people brought typewriters to write. We didn't call it dating. He never mentioned past relationships. I didn't bring up Caleb. But something about the way he asked, "Did you sleep better this week?" lowered my guard. When I panicked over a last-minute client rejection, he simply said, "No deal is worth losing your sleep over." I sat behind the wheel of his car at 3 a.m., crying while trying to hold back a full-blown panic attack, when I first told him about Camille. Not everything, but enough for him to understand how deeply I'd been hurt, betrayed by someone I loved and someone I once considered family. He didn't interrupt. No shallow reassurances. He just sat there, one hand resting on the steering wheel, eyes fixed ahead like he was standing guard, making sure the storm inside me passed safely. One late afternoon, as snow began to fall lightly over the porch, he took me to a used bookstore in Lowry Hill and bought me a first-edition copy of The Bell Jar, which I once mentioned reading back in college. I asked, "Do you always give women books?" "Only to the ones brave enough to reread their own pain." I didn't say anything more. On the way to the car, I noticed the faint words on the book's cover. "Even when you feel like sinking, you still deserve to be held." I didn't ask whether he chose that copy on purpose. I just held his hand. There were no declarations, no clear labels. But deep down I could feel it. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to pretend to be strong. There was no rush. No one forcing me to get over it. Zachary let me walk at my own pace. And I didn't realize how much I needed that until someone was willing to walk beside me. The first heavy snowfall of winter blanketed Hennepin Avenue as Zachary stopped the car in front of the 2-story red brick house I rented in Uptown. The streetlights reflected off the thin layer of ice on the roof, and he remained still, his hand gently resting on the wheel. "It's really cold tonight," I said, turning to unbuckle my seatbelt. He smiled. Yeah, but I think you should open this before heading inside. I tilted my head, watching as he pulled a small, deep blue velvet box from his coat pocket. No speech. No roses. No audience. Just one soft sentence. If you're ready, I want to be the one beside you, through every season, even the grayest ones. I didn't answer right away. I looked at the ring, a slender platinum band with a single teardrop emerald, flanked by 2 small diamonds. It wasn't flashy, didn't scream wealth, but I had never seen anything so quietly strong. I nodded without a word. We got married 6 months later on a crisp spring morning at a historic church in the suburbs of Edina. Fewer than 40 guests, mostly friends from Peak Wave, the running group, Madison and Rachel, and a few relatives from Zachary's side. My mother flew in from Vermont, carrying the veil she wore at her own wedding. It had yellowed with time but still smelled faintly of lavender. I didn't invite Camille. Not out of hate, but because I wasn't ready to stand beside her in any photo yet. My father sent a letter apologizing for not attending due to his health, but wrote one line that stayed with me. You deserve to be loved in a way that doesn't require endurance. Zachary wore a navy blue suit, his hand trembling slightly as he slid the ring on my finger. I couldn't stop smiling, so much so that my mother whispered, "Haven't seen you smile this much since middle school." We didn't go on a fancy honeymoon. Just rented a small wooden cabin by Lake Superior, where we spent 2 days reading, cooking, and sitting quietly by the fire without feeling the need to fill the silence. Back in Minneapolis, I returned to work with a completely different mindset. That inner calm made everything else feel less unstable. Madison offered me the role of creative strategy director after she accepted a consulting position at an investment fund. You've weathered enough storms to know what clients actually need, she said, handing me an envelope with a recommendation letter. More importantly, you don't run from what scares people. Zachary left Haven Tech and started Vireo Capital, an angel fund focused on startups led by women or built around social impact. He rented a small office near downtown, decorated it with succulents and abstract art. Most evenings I'd get home first and cook something simple, while he'd stop by the nearby market to pick up fresh bread or whatever bottle of wine was on sale. That was our life, step by step, no flash but full of intention. Then came the charity fundraiser for women entrepreneurs in the Midwest, held at the Nicolette Hotel. I was invited as a speaker. Zachary was the main sponsor. The ballroom buzzed with local tech and media professionals. After my speech, Zachary and I walked past a group of investors chatting about recent acquisitions. One silver-haired man in glasses pointed at Zachary and said, "You're the one who outplayed Tesseract last year, right?" That whole deal made more noise than Foster and Keller's scramble for Enopath back in 2020. I turned to Zachary. "Enopath?" I asked, my voice a little quieter. He nodded slightly. "That was a contested investment. My firm won." "The Keller. Is that Caleb?" He hesitated for a second. "Caleb Keller, yes. I know him. I wasn't sure how deep your history went, but I suspected something when I saw your name on the conference guest list." I gave a half smile. "You knew I used to be his fiancé?" "I don't know the details, only heard things. But when I met you I didn't think of Caleb. I thought of the woman standing alone at the conference, holding her wine glass like she didn't need anyone." A strange feeling washed over me. Not anger. Not confusion. Just completeness. Caleb had lost that deal entirely. I used to think his career crash came from lack of focus. But now it was clearer. It was Zachary who had cut off the blood supply, with a cold, precise investment decision. Did it feel satisfying? Zachary shook his head. No. Because when you win the right way, there's no need for satisfaction. I just wasn't sure if you wanted to know the truth. I stayed quiet for a while, then took his hand and led him to the balcony, where the golden lights reflected off the half-melted snow. Maybe it's the universe's version of justice. But what I know for sure is, this time I'm not the one left behind. Zachary gently squeezed my hand. In his eyes there was no smugness, only the calm of someone who had weathered storms and didn't need applause to know exactly where he stood. In my heart there was no room left for the past, only for what lay ahead, with someone who didn't need to win me from anyone, but simply chose to stay. The call came on an autumn afternoon, when Minneapolis was bathed in golden light. I was adjusting slides for an end-of-month conference when the phone rang. My mother's name lit up the screen, but the voice wasn't hers. "Is this Audrey?" A man's voice, deep and urgent. "This is Dr. Keller from Norwalk Hospital. Your mother, Eleanor, has just been admitted. We've found a pancreatic tumor. It's metastasized." I stood up and the whole room tilted. That night, I flew back to Connecticut, where my parents had moved after selling the old house in Vermont. Zachary insisted on coming with me, rearranging his entire meeting schedule to get on the earliest flight. My mother lay motionless under the white hospital lights, her face pale. When I took her hand, her fingers were cold as stone, but her eyelids fluttered. "You're here," her voice was barely a whisper. I leaned in close. "Don't give up on your sister, Audrey. Don't let me go while you're still turned away from each other." I bit my lip and tears fell onto her hospital gown. Outside, Zachary was speaking to the doctor, his hand still wrapped around a cup of now-cold coffee. She lived for nearly 3 more weeks. I took extended leave from work and moved into a small house near Silver Lake to care for her. At night, lying on the sofa, I listened to her ragged breathing, the drip of the four, and the quiet sighs of my father behind a closed door. 3 days before she passed, Camille appeared. I was boiling water in the kitchen when I heard a car stop outside. She wore a gray trench coat, soft curls in her hair, and held a bouquet of white peonies. "Will you let me in?" I didn't answer. But I stepped aside, letting her walk through. Camille stood by the hospital bed for a long time, saying nothing. Then placed the flowers on the side table and softly said, "I'm sorry, Mom." My mother didn't open her eyes. But I saw her lashes tremble. The funeral was held a week later at the old church where my mother used to sing in the choir. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and quiet murmurs from longtime neighbors. I walked into the chapel with my father, holding his trembling arm. Zachary followed behind in a tailored black suit, his eyes quietly scanning the room. Then I heard the clicking of heels at the entrance. Camille walked in arm in arm with Caleb Keller. He wore charcoal gray, sunglasses despite the cloudy skies. She was in a tight black dress, holding a Chanel clutch, her expression laced with pride. They walked straight to my father. Camille kissed his cheek. Caleb extended his hand. My father only nodded without reaching out. Camille turned to me. "I'm sorry." I gave a slight nod and stepped past her to guide my father to his seat. Zachary placed his hand gently on my back. A small gesture, but one that kept me grounded. When the service ended, everyone followed the procession to the cemetery behind the chapel. Camille stood beside me without saying a word. Caleb lingered at a distance, his face blank. As the casket was lowered, guests gave their final words. When it was Camille's turn, she stepped up to the microphone. "My mother was the strongest woman I've ever known. She loved, even when we didn't deserve it." Then she paused, her gaze landing briefly on me. "There are mistakes we spend a lifetime paying for." Strangely, I felt no storm inside. Maybe because there was nothing left for her to take from me. That evening, extended family gathered at the house. Zachary brought me a cup of hot tea. I sat reading the letter my mother had left, neatly folded inside her favorite copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. "I hope the two of you find forgiveness, not to forget but to keep living." When I looked up, Camille was standing in the doorway holding an empty teacup. "Could I have a little tea?" I handed her a cup. We drank the same thing in silence, without bitterness in our eyes. Zachary watched from afar. He didn't step in. He understood. Some things I had to walk through alone. No one else could do it for me. And that evening, in a house full of memory, I touched the sharp edges of what once wounded me, only to realize that sometimes, the deepest cuts are where healing begins. That gray afternoon felt like the sky itself was in mourning. After my father left for dinner with an old friend on the north side of town, I stayed behind to sort through my mother's wardrobe. Every dress, every scarf, every pair of shoes held the breath of a life I had never fully seen until now. The bottom drawer opened to a soft leather notebook, its spine worn, the pages inside faded and smudged with fingerprints. Mom had a quiet habit of journaling, something she never talked about. I sat down by the window and flipped to the last section. "No matter what happens, I still hope Audrey and Camille can one day sit together, see each other without the filter of old wounds. If not for me, then for themselves." I closed the notebook, unsure what I would do with it. Not even 8 o'clock yet when the doorbell rang. I didn't need to peek through the curtain to know who was standing on the porch. Camille wore a cream turtleneck sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders, face pale and stripped of the pride she carried at the funeral. No makeup. The dark circles under her eyes said more than any small talk could. "You're not with Caleb?" I asked, stepping aside so she could enter. "No." I lied and said I needed to stay with Dad one more night. The kitchen air felt heavy and cold. I poured tea and set down 2 cups out of habit. Camille sat across from me, resting her hands on the rim of the cup but never bringing it to her lips. "Do you think I'm the worst person in the world?" I didn't answer. Caleb isn't the same anymore. If he ever was. He reads all my messages, forced me to consolidate our bank accounts, made me sign a new prenup after his company started tanking. I stared down at the cold tile beneath my feet. Remember when I said, "I won"? I actually believed it. But I didn't anticipate the price of possession. "How long has it been?" I asked. "Nearly 3 years. I feel suffocated. I'm afraid of my own voice when I walk into the house." "Then why haven't you left?" She let out a bitter laugh. "Pride. Fear of people saying I stole someone's husband only to be discarded. And money. If I divorce him now, I walk away with nothing." I got up and placed Mom's journal on the table. She wrote a lot about us in here. Pages where she just repeated our names like a prayer. Camille opened to a page, her eyes landing on a passage. "Today Audrey called at noon just to say her new pie burned in the oven." I laughed for 10 minutes. I wish Camille would call like that too. But she doesn't. She pulled out a tissue, wiping away the drop that fell onto the paper. "Do you still hate me?" she asked. "I don't know if that's the right word. But you left a deep cut. Those don't heal with a simple apology." "I didn't come here for forgiveness," she said, voice lowering. "I came to tell the truth. So if I leave Caleb, you won't hear it from someone else." "Are you actually leaving him?" "I've hired a lawyer. I'm looking at a small apartment near Boston. Might start over with an entry-level PR job." Silence lingered for a few minutes. The only sounds were the wind tapping the windows and the faint scent of mint rising from the tea. I looked at her and saw someone unfamiliar. No lipstick, no bravado, just a woman unraveling without a place to land. "Do you remember how Mom used to bake 2 pies every Christmas? One for me with cinnamon apples, one for you with blueberries." Camille gave a faint smile. She said neither of us had to give up our favorite. Fair doesn't mean equal, it means being understood. I nodded. That night, we cleaned out a few things from Mom's room, found old photographs, and shared stories we'd forgotten we even had. As she got ready to leave, I handed her a small wooden box where Mom kept her letters. "Take it with you. There are notes in there she wrote for both of us." Camille hugged the box tightly. "I won't let you down again," she whispered. "I'm not promising forgiveness. But I'm willing to listen, if you're being real." She nodded, her gaze steady. The door closed behind her, but this time it didn't feel like it was pushing us apart. It marked a boundary between what had been and what still might be. By May, lilacs bloomed all over the balcony of the house we'd bought in Linden Hills. I leaned back in a white-painted wooden chair, resting my hands over the swell beneath my linen dress, listening to Zachary talk excitedly in the kitchen. "It's not Mexican food, don't worry. The doctor said no spicy stuff, unless you're craving it. In that case, I'll order the whole food truck." I laughed and pressed my hand where the baby moved. Every tiny kick reminded me, what once felt impossible had become real, not by miracle but by unrelenting patience. We'd gone through 3 failed treatment cycles. There were moments I almost gave up. But Zachary never did. He never pressured me to hope, never demanded anything. He was just there. At doctor appointments, when I broke down sobbing in the bathroom, in the nights I couldn't speak. "We can become parents in more ways than one," he once said when I was ready to quit. "But I won't let you walk through this alone." The good news came in mid-January. On a morning I went to the clinic just because I'd been nauseous for days. The doctor called while I was in a virtual meeting and asked, "Audrey, are you ready to hear something that might make your heart race?" I froze. Then came a scream so loud Madison ran in from the next room thinking I'd had an accident. That afternoon, I bought a pair of lemon yellow baby shoes, placed them in a box and tied a ribbon around it. When Zachary opened it, he went unusually quiet. Then he suddenly pulled me into a hug, tight and trembling. I don't want to ask anything, he whispered into my ear. I just want to be here. Always. Like I promised. Camille called one Tuesday morning while I was watering the plants on the porch. I just started my new job, she said, her voice lit with joy. A small content agency in Cambridge. I write articles, help plan campaigns. The pay's not much, but I like how they treat their staff. She rented a 2-bedroom apartment, chose her own curtains, and started learning to cook from scratch. The photos she posted on Instagram weren't ball gowns or fancy cocktail parties anymore. They were a freshly baked apple pie or a messy sketch she'd drawn late at night. I'm trying, sis, she said in a message later. Not to make up for anything, but to live true to whatever good part of me Mom still believed was there. I didn't reply right away, but I saved the message and reread it whenever the weight in my chest returned. When summer came, I left Peakwave to focus on my pregnancy. Madison hugged me in the hallway, joking, "When you come back, make sure they throw in a diaper stipend." Zachary turned the garden-adjacent room into a nursery. The walls were painted soft green with a tiny bookshelf beneath the window. I picked out a moon-shaped nightlight and placed it next to the crib. Some days I'd sit alone in that room looking around with tears pricking my eyes. Not because of the past, but because this present looked nothing like I used to imagine. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't need witnesses. It was the quiet piece of a life that didn't feel borrowed. I realized that pain back then didn't destroy me. It uprooted me from a place I once thought was everything. It forced me to leave, to break, so I could begin again, this time as myself. Zachary often says I'm a strong woman, but I don't see it that way. I didn't walk through storms like a warrior. I swam through them barely. But I didn't drown. And it was forgiveness, not for Camille but for myself, that pulled me from the bottom. I used to think letting go meant surrendering, admitting weakness. But holding on to rage was the real chain. Forgiveness, even just in my mind, became the way out. The day my child was born, Zachary sat beside me, never letting go of my hand despite the sweat soaking through his shirt. When that first cry echoed through the room, every emotion I had burst open. "Welcome to the world, Ellie," I whispered, pressing my lips to her forehead. "Your name is Grandma's gift. She'll tell you stories through the stars." That night, in the quiet hospital room, I opened my phone and sent Camille a photo. Ellie curled in her father's arms, eyes closed, lips curved in a dreamlike smile. Less than a minute later, Camille's message appeared. "You did it. She's going to grow up free. I'm happy for you. Truly." I stayed quiet. But inside, something softened, like water receding from stone after a long storm. My story doesn't have a fairy tale ending. It holds real loss, mistakes that can't be undone, wounds that scarred. But every morning I wake up, see Ellie beside me, hear Zachary ask, "Did you sleep okay?" I know I've lived through the impossible. Not to beat anyone. Just to be whole again. Audrey was pushed out of her own life by the people she trusted most. Instead of chasing justice in the hands of those who betrayed her, she created her own, by walking away, healing and rebuilding from the ashes. She never declared forgiveness aloud. Quietly, she unraveled the emotional chains that had bound her for too long. When she stopped waiting to be understood, she finally understood herself. In a noisy world, Audrey wasn't looking for applause, only a silence deep enough to hear her own heart beat again. What do you think of Audrey's choices? Can forgiveness truly free us from the past? Share your thoughts below. And don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful, heartfelt family stories like this one.